Hi, so I made a video a while ago, a few years ago actually, of my green tree python setup, and I had lots of questions and I needed to make an update video. Unfortunately, I don't have this cage anymore, so I'll have to wing it a bit, but I have some plans on how I can show you what I've done. So the first thing I wanted to address was the river leak. I remember showing in the video that I patched that up and that didn't really work. So let me show an example of what I've done. So I've mocked this up in SketchUp. So this is the basic layout of the cage. The water would fall down the waterfall, go around the lake part. There would be a pump here that pumps it back up into the corner. So it would go like this. This side was completely separate, filled with clay balls, and the idea was to keep these separate. The downside to this was when it leaked over to the right, or even just misting the right side of the cage, it would fill up with water. So I put this plug in to try and drain the water out. But after doing this a few times, I got upset and I decided to come up with a better plan. So what I ended up doing was I cut holes through this middle barrier and I set up a piece of plastic here to divert the flow of water around. The flow would go around this other piece of plastic, which is another diverter, go around here, in through the back, and then get pumped up. So the water flow would be down here, around as usual, get stopped, come through this gap, around, and then through. And this way, it didn't matter if there was a slight leak because the water's coming through anyway. Yeah, so that's what ended up happening with it. I have some pictures of it. So this is the diverter. It was just a piece of tub that I cut up. You can see the holes that I cut through. I siliconed it in place just so it wouldn't float off. There's the hole through the back, there's the hole into the middle part, and this is what it looked like. So again, the water coming down the waterfall, through here, around, and then back, and there's water in here at the moment, so you can see how it goes. I filled the right part up with the stones. I covered up the divider with some stones here. So these are stones, these are the clay pellets. The clay pellets have a large surface area, so in aquaponics people use these to help microbes break down the nitrates and stuff. So in doing so, I actually added a massive surface area for filtration, and that would help to not have to filter as often. So with it all put back together, it worked quite well. This would filter everything out. The only thing that I would add is I put the plants in directly on top of those clay pellets, and I think to make it better, I would build that level up a bit more because these plants were very, very damp often. They still grew well and it worked well, but I think a lot of the springtails died off. So to keep it more bioactive and a bit drier, I would increase the level of the cocoa fiber in this area to make sure that it was deep enough. Honestly, once I had it in there, I mentioned that it was a bit damp. Once I had it in, I didn't really touch it. I just left it in there. The plants grew like mad. I was constantly having to clip the plants back. So I think the system as a whole was quite healthy. What about the snake poop? If the snake managed to poop in the water, then I would scoop it out. And if I saw a big poop lying on top of the cocoa part, then I would get it out. But most of the time, it would get in there and it would just biodegrade. It would take care of itself. So this actually worked quite well in terms of like being a bit bioactive. Maybe if there was more springtails around, the poop would have gone even quicker. But yeah, it seemed to work really well. And then the last part was about the pump. Once I set up the cage as it was in its final state with the pumps, the water circling underneath the plants, the increased surface area really helped to filter out most of the gross stuff. So I didn't really have much pump management or pump maintenance after that. In the top left of the cage, there was a sponge that I put in there just to catch any debris before it fell down the waterfall. I think that I changed once or twice in the 1.5 to 2 years that I had this cage. So once it was set up properly, it was very, very low maintenance. Another one of the questions that I had, well, more haters about it, Anyway, one of the big issues that people have was the size of the perches. So I did a bit of a test with these. I added in smaller perches, which were more appropriate to the green tree python's size, and I tested each day, and I came and took pictures of where the green tree python is resting. So this is on before it started. I had some sticks just placed randomly around the cage, and on the first day, the snake stayed on the thick branch. Day 2 on the thick branch. I moved the branches around. Day 3 on the thin branch. Day 4 on the thin branch. Moved them around again, back on the thick branch. Back on the thick branch. Day 6, thick branch. And the thick branch again. So the size of the branch didn't seem to actually do much for the snake. It would choose to go on the thicker branch just depending on where the branches were. So I did end up leaving that thin branch in there for it. But yeah, it was kind of random, and I don't think it's as life or death as people make out with regards to the thickness of the branch. Definitely placement has something to do with it, but you would think that if it was so crucial, the snake would always pick the correct size branch regardless of where it's placed. So that one seems to be a bit busted for me. I'm happy with the way I set it up. If you're going to do something like this and you want the appropriate size branches, feel free. But for me, it seemed to not be a big issue. Another question I was asked was about the foam, how that held up over time, if it started to try and float and lift off, or if it started to break down. Honestly, the only time that I noticed that the foam was squishy was when I cut these holes, because it started leaking through. Once I cut these holes, I actually siliconed inside of the foam on both of those sides, and after that I had no issues with it. Nothing broke down in the 1.5 to 2 years that I had this. The guy who I sold this to, I haven't heard anything from him about it falling to pieces. So even though the foam is in contact with water, I did try to cover it with silicone. So I think that did part of it. And then even when in some places, like in the island part, where the coating wasn't as good, it didn't fall apart. I didn't see, other than the initial filling, I didn't see any floating pieces of foam or anything like that. So I think this foam did hold up well, even when it was in contact with the water. So I had a quick thought. The one thing that you could do if you're worried about the foam, and the one thing I would do next time, is instead of using the foam as a divider, if you wanted to use a divider, I would try and silicone in a piece of glass, because then you know that the glass is going to be a good barrier. And then from there you could always put the foam on top of the glass just to make it look more aesthetically pleasing, to make it have a gradual ramp, and keep the actual glass as the part that separates out the water from the rest of it. Another quick question was, people ask me where I got these rocks from. I think I just got them from the local hardware store. In the outdoors section, they had these rocks for, I think they're for decorating plants or something like that. I wouldn't put too much stock into where you get the rocks from. I'm sure you could get them down from a local river or something. Yeah, I just got the cheapest option. I found it there. Along that vein, someone also asked me about the bioactive setup. Like, did I sterilize the substrate before I put it in? Now, there's some different theories about microbes versus sterilized and things like that. So just give me a second. Okay, I managed to find the group that I was looking for. If you want to get more ideas about the reptiles' bioactive setups, join this group on Facebook. They have some guides for you. For example, if you're trying to get bioactive setups for amphibians, they will advise that you walk away from where the water might be in the woods or something like that, and rather go up the hill where there's less likely to be amphibians and things like that. But in general, they will encourage you to take the microbes from the wild and introduce them to your tank. This is part of setting up a ecosystem inside your tank. If you do manage to sterilize everything, you will need microbes in there to break things down, and the only thing that'll be in there is the stuff that you introduce, so the stuff that comes from your snake's poop or things like that, and that can be dangerous. Another example of this in humans is poop transplants. Now, this is super weird. I'm going off topic a little bit, But if you read about this a bit more, it's all about how some people, they don't have the right bacteria in their stomach to break down all of their food, and it can cause health problems. And this can come from people having lots of antibiotics, which just wipes out their gut. So if you are doing a reptile setup and you do the same thing, you wipe clear all of the microbes and you try and start again, you could get ones that are pathogenic establishing. But if there's already an ecosystem set up and they're already competing, then all the bad ones should be in check by the good ones. So before flaming people online for doing stuff like this, I'd just read up a little bit more, join the group, talk about it with some people in the group who've been doing this for years, and just read a bit more about it because it's really fascinating, and I think you could learn a lot. Along the same vein, people asking about mold and things like that. I didn't really have any issues with the mold. Occasionally near the waterfall, I would get some algae growing, but no mold. I didn't see any weird stuff like that. It seemed to handle it well. Also, in this picture, you might have noticed there is a poison dart frog. This is another source of controversy over my video and some of the places that I posted it. The poison dart frogs in captivity are thought of not to be venomous, or poisonous rather, because they don't eat the ants that they sequestered alkaloids from. So theoretically, in captivity, they're not poisonous. So even if the snake did eat it, I think the snake would be fine. And honestly, these are just a cool ornament for the tank. I wasn't too phased if they get eaten or not. They're a little bit expensive, but I wasn't too worried. The dart frog guys, obviously not that excited by that particular situation, but that's just how it is. However, while looking this up, while investigating it, I did find some interesting behaviors. So this is a video that I posted to Instagram, where the snake was looking directly at the dart frog, and the dart frog started moving. And the snake sort of goes out of its way to start pulling its head back and moving out of the way. This is the furthest thing from hunting behavior I've ever seen in this green tree python. This thing is crazy. Anything that would move anywhere in the tank, its head would be there. It would be ready to kill. So this was a good example and a good bit of evidence for me that it wasn't going to eat the dart frogs. Here is the dart frog right on its coils as well. So it seemed to work well for me. I was happy to risk it. I know other people don't. Some people might think I'm evil or cruel for that. It's a snake in a box. I wouldn't stress out too much about it. I evaluated the risks and I decided that it was worth letting them figure it out. And yeah, it seemed to work well. The dart frogs, I'm not that good at looking after frogs, so they started to decrease in number, but the snake wasn't eating them. I'm just not that good with fruit flies and looking after frogs and stuff. I'm just going to stick to snakes. But yeah, keeping them in together, it seemed to work fairly well. So I was happy with that. Along that same vein, I did add some neon tetras to the pond at the bottom. You can see there's one over there. There might be another one in the picture. They did quite well for a while, and then they started disappearing. I don't know if the snake was eating them. I don't know if they were just getting better at hiding in all the nooks and crannies that I've given them, or I don't think the dart frogs were eating them. They're similar size to the dart frogs. But this went well for a while, and then it stopped going well. I'm not sure exactly what happened, so I wouldn't call this one a success. It was sort of mixed results, but I gave it a shot. It worked for a while. Maybe if I had a bigger pond system, then it would have worked better. I'm not sure. And lastly, people were asking me about the price for this. I think, including the second-hand tank, I think I got it for just over £100. Including that, I think the whole build was about £350. That was including the cork bark, which was actually one of the big expensive parts, the plants, the rocks were cheap, the foam was cheap, the silicone was fairly cheap, the cocoa stuff was pretty cheap, and the plants, you can start off just with a couple and then multiply them from there. This stuff multiplied like mad, and so did the prayer plant. I was able to split that a lot of times. I didn't have a lot of success with these guys. Bromeliads, they didn't seem to do that well, but I'm not very good looking after plants either. With most of these things, I just wanted to set it up and see what happened. So some of the species loved it and they took off. This one ended up drying out and dying. That's fine. I think it might have been too close to the heat source. And then I also had a question about lighting. I have a Perspex sheet at the top here. You can see it well in this picture. And I just had 2 LED lights. If you look on eBay for LED corn light or something like that, you can usually find these ones. They're very similar to a more expensive brand. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. If you type in corn LED light horizontal, you can get these, which is what I used, and I could get them at a fraction of the price that you would get the Arcadia Jungle Dawn lights. So these are $67-ish. They are just LED lights, and I'm pretty sure they're very similar to these. So maybe the official ones have some special UV or something like that, but if you're shining UV, the UV is not going to get through the plastic anyway, the way I had it. And honestly, just with these cheaper ones, the plants exploded. They were doing very, very well. They looked really good in the enclosure, so I would recommend giving these ones a shot. You might need to wait a while because it's coming from China, but these worked so well for me, and I would try these before spending 10 times the amount on the official ones from Arcadia. Cool, well I think that's all I have for now. I'm not very good at updating YouTube, so if you want to get more info, try and follow me on Instagram. It's SnakeJade. Also, I have a Facebook page for... There we go. So I have a Facebook page for if you're looking for African house snakes and you are close to New Brunswick in Canada. Look me up. I have some available at the moment. If you just want to talk about house snakes, then I'm happy to talk about that too. So feel free to get in contact. If you still have questions about the green tree python enclosure, I can try and answer them as best as I can. As I said, I don't have this anymore, so I'm going to have to try and reach back in my memories to try and figure these things out, but I'm always happy to help. Thanks for everyone who's tried this. Thanks for the good feedback, and happy reptile keeping. Thanks.